Hey guys, so if you're watching this, today should be Thursday. And we're going to finish up what we started yesterday. So Chapter 2, Section 2, looking at the first government. As a quick review, we did go over the bell ringer. You guys did well in the comments. Chances are I probably commented on your comment, so I'd love you to comment back on my response. I may have asked you to explain your answer a little more, or maybe I even disagreed with you or whatever. But just always comment back and let's keep the dialogue going in there in the comments section. It's been really good so far. I'm very pleased with it. So we went over the objectives, key terms, as in our video yesterday. And I also looked at the Declaration of Independence and we talked about it for quite a bit. Hopefully at this point you remember it's just declaring independence, but did it actually get us there? No. We had to fight a war and have a peace treaty. But some of the things that it lays out, well, grievances for one, but it also lays out some awesome unalienable rights. And we talked a little bit about the document, the people making it. I did say four. What I meant to say was five, but four, and Thomas Jefferson being, the primary architect of the Declaration of Independence. So five of them wrote it together. We also did look at just human rights in general. Not that the Declaration covers like freedom of information, anything like that, but these are important, and this at least gets that conversation started. What are we guaranteed? This is setting up our rights, which is awesome. Our rights, which are made up, by the way, we make them up. We have our Bill of Rights, for instance, in the Constitution. It's 10. Germany, how many rights do they have? Do they have like 15? And what about Spain? Do they have 20? Does this country have 40? And you have these rights. They're God-given unless, they're taken away. Maybe it's an emergency. Maybe it's a bad government. Maybe it's, school, for instance. Like, you give up a lot of your rights. So rights, they're made up, but we get to make them whatever we want it to be. And I think that we have done a good job with that, with the Bill of Rights. And with the Declaration basically kickstarting all that. So pretty cool document. All right, so now let's look at the Articles of Confederation, which would set up our first government being away and breaking up with the British. This is when we're on our own, and it's not the Constitution that has our first government, it is this, the Articles of Confederation. So the Articles of Confederation was the first plan of government in 1783. This was not the Declaration of Independence. Totally different document. Remember, we have to understand the differences between these. That does not set up a government. It's a breakup letter. It's a breakup letter. So the purpose was to preserve state sovereignty. Sovereignty just meaning authority, rule, independence. Like Pennsylvania's on its own. Doesn't really have to listen to anybody. That's sovereignty. And preserve that state sovereignty through a confederation. Confederation just meaning league, an alliance, an agreement. Okay. So the Articles of the U.S. was the first constitution. This was the first plan of government. Our constitution would be the second. This was proposed by the Continental Congress in 1777, but it wasn't ratified until 1781, and then put in place in 1783. The Articles represented a victory for those who favored state sovereignty. Remember in history class, hopefully, this is the big debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Some want more states' rights, some want a stronger federal government, but they were kind of worried, is this going to be another, let's say, tyranny like we've had with the king, who does this and bosses us around and puts their soldiers and, so on. You know how it goes. They want to have a decentralized government. They don't want some one person or one authority in charge, because that didn't work out great for them before, and that's kind of what they were getting away from. So moving on. Article 2 stated in the Articles of Confederation that each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence in every power which is not expressly delegated to the U.S. So any amendment required unanimous consent to the states, and they only had one house. They didn't have two houses like we do in our Congress. They only had one house. So each state, 13 colonies, had one rep. So all of these have one representative, and to get anything passed, you need every single person to agree. Okay, we can't agree on anything. You and I can't agree on everything. Maybe we think, for instance, if I don't know if you guys are too young or not, there used to be this dress, is it gold, is it blue? And everybody fought about it forever. Um, it's hard to agree on things. So, what shade of blue is this? What shade of green is this? We're going to have all these different answers. So imagine 13 delegates. They all have their own interests, they have their own people, their own cultures to worry about. Back then, this colony, like let's say Pennsylvania, it's considered its own country pretty much. Like they're nothing like those people from Virginia, they're nothing like those people from Maryland or New York and so on. They're all different. They have their own interests. Tobacco, slavery, I don't know, whatever they're doing up here, lobsters or something, sort of a joke. But they're going to do things to take care of their own people. Because before they were states trying to be united, well, they were their own countries. So, are they going to get along? Can they even get anything done? Can they get anything passed? They only have one representative each. Each are just as powerful as each other. What happens if they have different population? What if they have a bigger population or a smaller one? What happens if one has more resources versus one that's like a barren waste? And another issue, outside of just passing any amendments, well, you also need 13 out of 13 to approve a treaty. So if we are going to war against natives, French, Dutch, Spanish, whomever else, you need full unanimous agreement. And then what happens if two states disagree? We have the Mason-Dixon line for my PA history kids. Well, how do they come to terms? What if they're not happy with each other's currency or trade deal, whatever? Well, who says what's what? There's no executive to kind of work that out. There's nobody in charge above all the states, above these 13 representatives, to say, no, PA, you're right, or Maryland, you're right, or. And one last point is there's also no justice. There's no judicial branch to kind of interpret anything or interpret the laws. So again, maybe they can work out something between Pennsylvania and Maryland and kind of investigate, see who's right, see who's wrong, or whatever the solution can be. So these aren't great examples for me to give you, but I'm just trying to get your head spinning on some of the problems of the Articles of Confederation. So let me tell you a little bit more. The Articles of Confederation created a national government composed of Congress. All of these representatives are Congress members under B13. They have the power to declare war, they can appoint military officers, they can sign treaties, they can make alliances, they can appoint foreign ambassadors, and they can also manage their relations with Indians. All the states were represented equally in Congress, as I just said before, and you typically need a 9 out of 13 to approve a bill for it to become law. Now, a couple problems we see, or I guess more problems since I'm kind of all over the place with this. Under the Articles, the states, not Congress, had the power to tax. Congress could raise money only by asking the states for funds. They could borrow from foreign governments or they could sell some Western lands. In addition to that, Congress could not draft soldiers or even regulate trade, and that's kind of an issue. There was no provision for national courts. So what happens when, again, we have problems and who determines what that means, or the law, or the Constitution, at least under the Articles of Confederation? Well, what do we do? So the bottom line with this is that it had a very weak central government. Maybe that seemed like a good idea from getting away from the king, or at least that's what's taught in like every history civics book, every history and civics class. But this is what we actually needed. So with this series of events happening, well, it's kind of inadequate, doesn't work, and we get rid of it. It is drafted in 1777, like I said before, ratified in 1781, and put into place a little bit after, but it's replaced very early on by the Constitution by 1789. Very short-lived. Now to reiterate some of the weaknesses, since I talked a little bit too much. One is that too much power is given to the states. Especially when you think that we need unanimous decisions to pass bills. You need 9 out of 13. You need 13 out of 13 to pass treaties. This is like a big deal. It's extremely difficult for states to cooperate, especially since there's no oversight. There's no basic shot caller. It's 13 people that all have the same say, and that's not always a good thing, although it sounds good. But when you have that many voices, that many interests, it's hard to get anything done. Congress struggled with passing laws because you needed 9 out of 13 or even 13 out of 13 for certain things like amendments and treaties. They had difficulty trading goods because each state would set up its own like currency. There wasn't a national currency. Like each state could have their own money. They could all have different trade agreements. This was a problem. Furthermore, they didn't really have anybody to collect the taxes, and they didn't really get any tax money since it was pretty much voluntarily, which is, again, weird. You would have boundary disputes between the states, but again, who determines? There's no executive. Who determines who's right or wrong? We don't know since they're all equal. And each state had their own money, as I said before. We didn't have any national courts to determine and help things like boundary disputes. And overall, well, states had sovereignty. Maybe it sounded like a good idea, but it didn't really work out. And it wasn't like a confederacy. It was more like what they say, the fragile league of friendship. So, yeah, these colonies were together, but it wasn't working too hot. Just to give you another visual on this, we can take a look at an illustration of it. Rough sailings ahead. No national court. Not good. No power to enforce treaties. Not good, since we didn't have an army. Remember, we don't have an army. No power to enforce laws. We don't have an executive, a president. No power to raise an army. You could volunteer, but who would, people do that, but who's going to do that for the Articles of Confederation, this basically new nation, sort of, that we just created on the fly. And also, lastly, no power to collect taxes. So, not a good start for us, but at least a good precursor for us to fix all the problems. And spoiler alert, that's what we go over next, the Constitution. So let's wrap it up. It was a quick one. I hope on purpose. I hope you stayed awake and you learned something about the Articles of Confederation. Now let's look at the review questions, which you will answer in comments. Why was the Declaration of Independence important? Why do you think? And then what were the impacts of the Articles of Confederation? Okay. Alrighty guys, that's all I have for you. Keep up the good work, and I'll talk to you through a video on YouTube tomorrow. See ya. Bye.